World of Warcraft Classic has a total of 9 different classes to choose from, all with their own unique playstyle. When I first started, I thought Warrior was going to be my favourite, swinging massive swords around for massive damage and yelling directly into the face of my enemies sounded pretty epic, but I don't know, it just didn't feel like my main character. It was missing something. But after a few months of playing, I finally tried out Feral Druid, and I love everything about it. The flexibility is fantastic, allowing me to switch to a tank with the press of a button. Being able to stealth around mobs is pretty awesome too, but my favourite part, power shifting. Easily my favourite mechanic in the entire game. Being able to replenish a chunk of your energy makes Feral Druid an incredibly fast-paced spec. However, I think we all know that Feral Druid really isn't that good, and that's why I've made it my goal to become the strongest and greatest Feral Druid in the entire game. And well, 3 weeks from now, the final raid of Vanilla WoW will be released, Naxramas, the absolute king of vanilla raids, offering actual boss mechanics and of course some of the best loot in the entire game. And well, I cannot wait to raid it for my very first time. Week 1 begins inside of AQ20, so pretty much since Phase 5's launch, I have ran this raid every single reset, so 2 every week, I think, and that was for 2 reasons. Firstly, for Cenarian Circle reputation, because once I am exalted, I can turn in a quest that will reward me with the trinket Earthstrike, an insanely powerful offensive trinket that would increase my attack power by 280 for 20 seconds. And well, at this point in time, I've already had Earthstrike for a couple weeks, and I am now running it for one specific piece of gear, the Boots of the Vanguard. These are absolutely insane for us. They are so good that they are base all content. And originally, I thought that I would surely get them during my reputation grind. Yeah, well, that wasn't the case, and I am still farming them months later. And since we are on the topic of gear, I'd like to update you a bit since it's been a while since our last Druid video. And you're probably expecting me to show you all of the cool things that I've managed to get, and well, it's really not as much as I was hoping. First of all, I did manage to get my best in slot shoulders. Yay. The other cool piece of gear is that I got the Cloak of Concentrated Hatred. Now stat wise, there were certainly better items to get, but the fact that this cloak has 1% hit stapled to it makes it the best in slot cloak item if you still need hit, which I do. And if you watch the previous Druid videos, then you'll know just how hard I've been trying to get the Drake Fang Talisman. Well, I still don't have it despite shoving 4 SRs into it every single week since Phase 3. In fact, I haven't even seen it drop a single time since the last video. But anyway, we kill Kuranax and move on to the second boss of the raid, General Rajax, the boss that can drop the Boots of the Vanguard. And well, we managed to DPS him down somewhat cleanly, and finally, the boots dropped. And luckily, I was the only person in the entire raid with a soft reserve on it, meaning I was guaranteed to be past them. Now obviously, I was incredibly happy to finally get them. However, there was one slight issue, and that was the fact that Feral Druid needs 9% hit to get hit capped. And well, the Boots of the Vanguard don't have any hit on them whatsoever, and the boots that I was currently using were the Boots of the Shadow Flame to get myself up to hit cap. And by now I was hoping that I would have the Drake Fang Talisman to make up that hit percent, but like I said, I haven't even seen them drop in months. So for now, the Boots of the Vanguard will simply sit in my bags collecting dust. Okay, so now that we had technically gotten ourselves a gear upgrade, it's time to start prepping for Nax. And well, what is the most important part of the prep? Learning the mechanics? No, it's being able to actually enter the raid. Unlike AQ40, Naxramas does have an attunement process. Simply, you just need to be honoured with the Argent Dawn and then turn in a quest. However, the quest that you need to turn in requires some rather expensive items. For honoured, you need to turn in 60 gold, 5 arcane crystals, 2 nexus crystals, and 1 righteous orb. And at the time of recording, that would cost around 770 gold just to enter the raid. And obviously, I don't want to spend that much. However, if you get to Exalted with Argent Dawn, you can enter Nax for free. And if you are revered, then it costs 2 arcane crystals and 1 nexus crystal. Still a good couple hundred gold, but far cheaper than honoured. Now, I didn't really have the time to grind all the way to Exalted, so I decided that I would just go for revered and then sink the few hundred gold into the quest. And the best way for us to get rep is by running trying either Stratholme or Scholomance, and well, apparently Stratholme is significantly quicker, so that's where I went. Now, it's really not that complicated. Clear the dungeon and you would get something like 2k rep. Now, originally, I wanted to run the living portion of the dungeon because you can get righteous orbs and make a little bit of gold along the way. However, after doing that, I quickly realized that the rep gains from undead are significantly greater. Now, in terms of items from the dungeon, we obviously don't need anything since we are far too cool for that. Except for one specific trinket, the Ramstein's lightning bolts. Trinket that would blast enemies for 200 nature damage. Now I know this doesn't seem that impressive, but Feral Druid really doesn't have any AoE at all. So when it comes to massive trash packs like in AQ40 and in Naxramas, my AoE is currently limited to just using this spell Hurricane and also Goblin Sapper charges. But in the near future, I'd like to turn that into Hurricane, Sappers, Dynamite, and Ramstein's lightning bolts. And look, I know that basically isn't playing Druid at that point, but it's just for the trash packs. Now, apart from simply killing things, there is one other way to get reputation in this dungeon. If you have the Argent Dawn trinket equipped, you can loot Scourge Stones. Now granted, they don't give much rep when turned in, but extra is extra. And that was it pretty much. I was now set for a solid 4 to 5 days of doing nothing but running Stratholme for reputation. Tonight is raid night, and I'll be totally honest, I forgot to hit record, but it's fine. By law, that has to happen once per video, so at least this time we got it out of the way early. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about loot just now, and we will cover that later on when I actually remember to record what I'm doing, but in this raid, I actually did get a pretty sizable upgrade, the Imperial Qiraji Regalia. No, that is not a piece of gear, well spotted, but it can be turned in to receive one of my best out of raid and trash weapons, the Blessed Qiraji Warhammer. Week 2 begins by going straight back to AQ40, not to raid, but to get my weapon. And the way we get it is we have to run all the way back to Cthulhu with the Regalia and the 3 Elementium ores in my bag, and then we turn it in. Not too much to say about that really. I then made my way back over to Stratholme for more rep grinding. And I'll be honest, that was pretty much all I did in week 2, because each run of Strat was taking like an hour to an hour and a half, not because the run itself, but simply because getting into a group as a feral takes ages, and then waiting for everyone to arrive takes longer than the dungeon itself. But it wasn't all just mindlessly running the dungeon over and over. We actually now did have a purpose in here, because if you look at our weapon, it is a one-handed weapon, which means we can equip an offhand of some sort, and the best one would come from a Stratholme boss, Archivist Galford, and it's the Tome of Knowledge. It's a weird thing, giving us 8 of every stat. Now, I didn't actually record me getting it simply because my hard drive was nothing but Stratholme runs, so eventually I just stopped recording them. However, what I did record was this run, where we get to Ramstein the Gorger and then we take him down, and he did drop the trinket we were after, and we win the roll on it. After a few days of grinding out Stratholme, we had managed to reach Revered with the Argent Dawn, but tonight is raid night, which I did actually record, well most of, because we're starting a Bug Trio. Now Bug Trio is an interesting boss, because as the name suggests, there is 3 of them, and the loot that drops is determined by which of the bosses dies last, and my best in slot chest piece does come from here, but sadly will only drop if you kill the hardest boss last, and every group I've ever raided AQ with just doesn't want to kill it last, because why would they? Just so a cat can get his chest piece? So we clear those guys up and start clearing out the trash. Now, as of recently, I have become a bit of a tank. I'm pretty much always either 5th or 6th tank, which means I don't actually tank bosses, but I do tank trash. And I can't lie, I do quite like it. Having some kind of responsibility other than Fairy Fire and being emotional support for the rest of the group is quite nice. Now, before we kill Sartura, let's talk about my soft reserves. In this group, you get 4 soft reserves spread out between AQ40, Blackwing Lair, and Molten Core. And since we are getting close to Nax, I felt that I couldn't keep prioritizing Drakefang Talisman and really needed to get the big feral items out of AQ40 because most of Feral's base is from here. So firstly, I put 1 soft reserve into the Gloves of Enforcement. These things are not only the best gloves stat-wise, but they also have 1% hit nailed to it. Secondly, the Qiraji Bracers of Execution. Again, stat-wise, they are fantastic, but also have 1% hit on them, and they would certainly be an upgrade over the crappy bat skin bracers that I've been using since like phase 3. Thirdly, the Belt of Never-Ending Agony. It is the absolute best belt for us, but it wouldn't be as big of an upgrade as the other two, but the reason I put 2 soft reserves into it is because it is quite contested, and the other 2 pieces of gear I was alone on, or so I thought. So we take down Battleguard Sartura, and the gloves dropped. It has been months since I had gotten any kind of upgrade, and I was so happy to finally get these gloves. That was until I realized that I actually wasn't alone on the gloves, but a warrior had decided to join me. I'll say that again. A warrior decided to join me on my best in slot leather gloves, despite the fact that they aren't best in slot for him, and his actual best in slot gloves also come from this raid. I really don't know what sort of room temperature IQ move that was, but my god, I hope I win that role. We then make our way down to Fangcris the Unyielding, and this is one of my favourite fights because I don't actually have to do anything mechanic wise except stand and stab. Next up is Vicious, probably the most unique boss in the raid, if not the entire game, because damage doesn't actually do anything against him, and the only way to kill him is by freezing him with frost spells. Now obviously as a druid, I don't have anything like that, so we use the Cold Rage Dagger plus a frost oil to occasionally send frost bolts at him, and after hitting him with I think 200 frost spells, he splits into a gazillion little blobs that we have to kill before they reach the middle. Now this isn't really our fight. We are mostly a support here due to Vicious poisoning everyone in the raid constantly, so I mostly just spam abolish poison on everyone. Next is Princess Huhuran, and I believe this is mostly a healer fight. For us, she might sleep you, and if she does, congrats, the fight is now over, because by the time it expires, she'll be dead. But if not, stand and stab. Next up is the Twin Emperors, a very, very important boss for us, because this is the boss that our bracers come from. And I would say that this is probably my favourite fight in the raid, because it feels like an actual boss fight. One of the twins only takes physical damage, and the other doesn't take physical damage, and they constantly switch places every like 30 seconds. But anyway, we get them down, and guess what? No bracers. Second to last in the raid is Oro. This is mostly a tank fight, I think, with the only real thing happening to us is that he occasionally ass blasts the DPS backwards. And finally is Mr. I's Cthulhu. I believe the last druid video was my first time doing AQ40, and I had absolutely no idea what was happening in this fight. But now that I do know what's going on, this is a fun fight. Phase 1, we all stand around him in groups, and Cthulhu eventually sends a giant beam that goes around in a circle, and we simply have to avoid it. Phase 2 begins, and now all we have to do is kill the tentacles that spawn. The other mechanic is that sometimes players will be sucked into the boss's belly, and they have to take down 2 tentacles inside of him, and once they are down, Cthulhu is now killable. And although I've been running this raid every single week since it came out, I've never once had to go inside of Cthulhu. And to be honest, I'm not sure what I found so confusing the first time I did this, because it's really not that difficult. But with that now over, it is time for the fun part, rolling on the loot whilst running to Blackwing Lair. And well, eventually, the Gloves of Enforcement came up and I was buzzing. I couldn't wait to equip my shiny new best in slot gloves. And well, that warrior rolled 23 and I rolled 39. I was so happy. Finally, after months and months of grinding, we get a huge upgrade. But wait, something isn't right here. Basically, in this raid, if you bring War Chief's Blessing and a flask, you get an extra 20 on your soft reserve rolls. And well, the warrior forgot to roll the correct number, and the guy who was doing the loot said, roll again. Ah, well, that's okay, we both just do it again. That's fair, whatever. Nope, not me. I don't get to roll again, just the warrior. And he then wins the roll. Now, maybe I'm being unreasonable here, but this really, really annoyed me, because I can guarantee that if the warrior had rolled higher on the first roll, they wouldn't make him roll again. So that means he got 2 rolls with a single SR. And just out of curiosity, let me know in the comments what you think of this situation. I just don't think it's right, and I think it could have been resolved in a much better way. Week 3 begins and phase 6 is finally here, along with the Naxramas raid. And well, First things first, I obviously had to get myself attuned, and when I landed at Light's Hope Chapel, there was so many quests. Like, I actually felt quite overwhelmed by just how much crap there was. Well, after running around for a bit, trying desperately to actually find the right NPC, I could turn over my hard-earned gold, and we are now attuned for Naxramas. But that's not all the excitement that Phase 6 has to offer, because it also brings these Scourge invasions, a limited time event that allows you to fight back the Scourge, and in return for doing so, you will be granted some necrotic runes that could be turned in for some spicy loot. Now here's the thing, ordinarily I would be nothing more than a mana bot and a 4-legged crit buff, but the second I logged on to grind some invasions, my messages were flooding. Suddenly, everyone wanted me to join them so that I could spam Moonfire to tag mobs for them. Now, like I said, we would be granted some necrotic runes. However, they are not 100% drop chance, and when they did drop, they would be rolled out between 5 players. So, actually getting them was slow. And to make matters just a little bit worse, it was so unbelievably crowded. At the time, there was 5 layers going at once, and it felt like you couldn't even move. So I decided to do what any sane person would do and come back at 3 in the morning, and it was fantastic. Myself and my guildie Miles managed to get most of the invasion to ourselves, and we had racked up like 30 necrotic runes. Now, as you are killing the ghouls, the crystal in the middle slowly starts losing health, and once it reaches 0, you can talk to an engineer to spawn in a Shadow of Doom for a small price of 8 runes, which doesn't sound like it's worth it at first, but should you be successful in taking one of them down, you will be granted 30 necrotic runes to spend on whatever you wish. And that was the best strategy we came up with. Resto Druid plus Warrior. I would constantly tag the mobs and drag them to Miles, and he would DPS them down. But what do we do with the runes? Well, you can turn them in for some pretty nice stuff. Mana potions, health potions, a tabard, all sorts of crap. But what we were interested in was a little item called the Consecrated Sharpening Stone, which when applied to a weapon would increase attack power by 100 for 1 hour, but only when used against undead. And of course, Naxramas is like 95% undead mobs. Now, for most people, they would use maybe 4 per week, 6 if the raid went bad. However, for Feral, we use between 8 and 15 weapons per week, which means we need between 8 and 15 sharpening stones per week, which is a lot. And I did the math, and it came out to something like 1200 necrotic runes just to last me until TBC. And well, that was me set for the next few weeks, mindlessly grinding once again. Tonight is raid night, and we are starting it off with some pretty bad news, because we were in fact not going to be running Naxxramas this week, because at basically the last second my guild decided that they were going to shut down the pug raids, which is where I've been raiding for basically my entire time playing, which means sadly I was going to have to miss out on the very first Naxxramas ID, but that's okay, we still have AQ40 to look forward to, which I remember to record, at least most of it anyway. Now, I want to talk about something that I discovered a little while ago, and that is what the cool kids call parsing, the act of trying to achieve the highest average DPS on every boss that you can. Now, I like it for a few different reasons. Firstly, it's a pretty good way to see your progress as a player every week. Second, it's kinda just fun to do, isn't it? I like seeing the leaderboards for every spec, and seeing what is actually possible, not just on Feral, but on every spec in the game. I mean, I was just flicking through them the other day, and I saw a Fury Warrior that had managed to hit 3000 DPS on Princess Huhuran. I would never have thought that was even physically possible. And well, looking at my own logs, turns out I'm not as terrible as I thought I was, at least from a raw damage view anyway. So anyway, we clear up Twin Emperors, and big surprise, no bracers dropped. And in this raid, my soft reserves were exactly the same as before, except this time I only get 3. So 1 on bracers, 1 on gloves, and 1 on the belt. So we take down Cthulhu nice and cleanly, and I open up that loot window, and there it is. Belt of never-ending agony. The pure joy that I feel every single time I get to roll on a piece of loot. Even if I didn't win it, just being able to have that chance is exhilarating. It comes up for rolling and I get a 50 roll. Not great, but I beat the other two. And then I lost to an 85 roll. Week 4, the final week. Because this week I was going to actually run the Naxramas raid. And starting it off, we were going all the way back to Stratholme. But why? We were already attuned. Well, before we go into Nax, I wanted to complete a quest that I had totally overlooked. And turning that quest in would reward us with a trinket called the Seal of the Dawn. It may look like an encyclopedia of text, but all it actually does is give us plus 81 attack power when fighting undead mobs. And since we still don't have Drakefang Talisman, this would be best in slot for us during Naxxramas. And it's really not that complicated at all. We simply have to pick up a book that will randomly spawn inside one of the 3 tower things. And admittedly, I couldn't find it at first and had to ask the tank to help me find it. I could then turn in the quest at Light's Hope Chapel and claim my new trinket. Today was the day. Finally, I was going to take on Naxxramas, and I honestly could not be more excited, but at the same time somewhat nervous, because I have no idea what is about to go down. Though I have actually done my research relatively extensively this time. I know, it's hard to believe. I even made myself a little sheet that I could quickly glance at if I forgot what a boss does. Now here's the thing, Nax is long. There were a total of 15 bosses and countless amounts of trash packs to take down. So we don't unboon yet, nor do we pop our flasks. Instead, we go around each of the wings and clear out the trash up to the first boss. That was until we get to what I believe is called the Death Knight wing, where we came across the first boss, Instructor Razuvius. Again, still not unbooned, because this wing is the hardest, and one simple mistake could wipe the raid and then bye-bye damage for the rest of the run. So this boss is quite terrifying, because I can't lie, I was very confused, because we didn't do anything that my sheet said that we would do. I read online that we were supposed to be LOSing something. Yeah, we in fact didn't do that, and I just stood around and DPS'd. Now the thing is, this boss actually cannot be tanked by a player, because he would simply crumble. Instead, a priest will mind control one of the adds that Razuvius comes with and tank him with the add instead. Can't lie, that is so cool. That is such a cool mechanic. I'm not sure if that was the intention with this boss, but regardless. Not too far away is the second boss, Goth Chick. A relatively weird one because this room is split into 2, melee on one side and casters on the other, and then loads of adds will spawn. And I think the way it works is that the casters kill the adds and then the spirits of those adds then come over to the melee side and we've then got to take them down. Could be wrong, but I don't really know. I just ran around and I clawed at things. But eventually, the boss showed up and we then just needed to DPS it down. Now, whilst we were making our way through to the next boss, let's talk about soft reserves. Same group that I was in AQ40 with, so we get a total of 3. Firstly, my best in slot legs, the Leggings of the Apocalypse. Stat wise, they are the best for us. Plus, they have taped 2% crit to it, so these are without a doubt my biggest upgrade in the raid. Secondly, the Ghoul Skin Tunic. Like I said earlier, it's pretty unlikely that I will ever get the vest from AQ40, and well, this is the next best option. And the interesting thing about this is that it doesn't actually drop from a boss and instead comes from the trash. And finally, the Band of Unnatural Forces. Honestly, this really isn't a huge upgrade, but I get 3 soft reserves and I was alone on the other 2 anyway. And well, we were making our way across to the 4 Horsemen and Ghoul Skin Tunic dropped. Ladies and germs, this is a day to remember. The day I finally get some loot. This was honestly a pretty huge upgrade for us, because I've been using the thick Silithid chest guard for a few months now, which isn't even DPS gear. Next up is the last for the Death Knight wing, and it's the 4 Horsemen. This boss is a raid killer and is the entire reason why we haven't unbooned yet, because it requires 6 tanks and incredible coordination from the healers in order to take it down effectively. And well, I was chosen to be one of the tanks. So what we do is each mob gets dragged into a corner of the room and they will constantly apply a stacking debuff to a player that causes them to take more damage from that specific boss. And well, you're not supposed to go over 3 stacks and I was at 6. So thank you, Ty Ahn for saving my giant bear ass. We then move to the safe spot. I didn't though, because I was told to go Mulgrain, so I did. And after him, it was back over to Blamo one more time, and then I simply had to wait for Zeliak to be taken down, because you can only have 3 DPS on him at one time. And well, we managed to get it down on our first try, but unfortunately, the leggings of the apocalypse did not drop. Next up, it was time for what I think is called the Construct Wing, and starting it off was Patchwerk. This guy isn't that bad from what I've experienced so far. He requires the use of 4 tanks, I think, because his mechanic is that he will strike whatever player has the most health, but also the most threat, but never the main tank. Pretty interesting way of dealing with this, because what we do is we dip our toes into the green goop next to us, and that will take a chunk of our health, meaning Patchwerk will never strike you. Apart from that, stand and stab. And honestly, cool boss. But now that Patchwerk is down, it is time for the hardest boss in the raid, the blobs. Honestly, this was the most nerve-wracking part, because if you touch these, you instantly die. And well, we all know how WoW Classic is with things like hitboxes, but thankfully, we did make it all the way through. Next up for the Construct Wing is Grobulus. This guy wasn't that bad at all. The tank will kite him around the room because he drops poison clouds on the ground, and I'll be honest, I don't think I saw any poison clouds. Then again, that might just be because of Classic and its love for invisible mechanics. But apart from that, if you get a special dot, run away. And well, after a few minutes, we managed to get him down nice and quickly. Next up is Naxxramas' pet dog, Gluth. Again, this boss wasn't bad at all. For the melee, he will fear us every 20 seconds, but for the casters, it is a bit more of a pain in the ass, because hundreds of little skeletons will spawn at the back of the room, and they need to kite and DPS him down. After Gluth, we move straight into the next boss, Thaddeus. Now this guy is super cool. Before we get to the boss himself, we first need to take down 2 of his construct ads. Again, melee on one side, casters on the other. They have an insanely cool tank mechanic, because occasionally the tanks will be launched to the other side of the room and they have to land on the other platform and start tanking the other ad. Once they are down, we have to quickly jump across the chasm of death, and I missed the jump. Honestly, I was doing pretty well in the raid, up until this point anyway. Now at the time, I didn't realise that I could just run back and jump over again, and by the time I had gotten back up, the boss was in fact dead. Excellent contribution from me, if I do say so myself. Next up is the Spider Wing, and first up is Ahn Qiraji. Don't think this guy is ever really considered a threat, to be honest. The main tank tanks him, and the off tanks tank the ads. I also got bitch slapped into the air at some point, and after a few minutes of DPSing, he was dead. The next boss is Grand Widow Fairlina. Now this is also quite an interesting one, because she comes with a bunch of ads much like Instructor Resuvius, and well, the boss will enrage and a priest has to mind control one of the ads and use an ability on the boss to dispel the enrage effect. And I had some actual responsibility in this fight. My job was to tank the second dispel ad until it was time to use it. Honestly, this fight was one of the coolest and might actually be my favourite. Next boss is Maxna. Now here's the thing with Maxna. Mechanics wise, we just needed to DPS her down, but she also has the chance to drop one of the best trinkets in the entire game. Currently, this group has it hard reserved for the main tank. Okay, fair enough, that makes sense. However, beyond that, and maybe I'm being a bit biased here, I think this trinket is best given to a feral. Whoa, pitchforks down, people. Because the increase that it gives feral significantly outweighs the increase that it gives a warrior. Doesn't matter anyway because it didn't drop. It was now time for the final wing in Naxxramas, and starting it off was Noth the Plaguebringer. Not too much to say about this one, to be honest. He blinks around sometimes and he applies a curse that has to be dispelled, otherwise death. And very out of character, but I actually did stop my captivities to decurse people. I know, a day to remember. Next up is Hygan the Unclean. I went into this fight not really expecting much, since I was told that this is typically a very easy fight. Just follow the boss closely and you won't die. However, sometimes he will teleport players out of the room and those players have to get back before phase 2 begins, otherwise you instantly die. And it just so happens that I was one of the people to get teleported out, and I'll be honest, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do, so I just followed the other players. And sadly, everyone who teleported away exploded. It was later discussed that it's actually better to just log out if you get teleported away, and it's a shame because because I was actually quite proud of my performance in this raid, and I actually hadn't died a single time other than getting cleaved by an ad at the very start. The last boss in this wing is Lotheb, and he's the boss that can drop the Band of Unnatural Forces. Even now, I still have no idea what this boss does, to be honest. Apparently, you cannot heal yourself in this fight, so DPS use things like potions and bandages. And the thing that I still don't really understand is the spores, which are basically blobs that spawn around the room, and when they are killed, players near them will get a buff. But you're supposed to go to the spores in groups or something like that, and I couldn't see it on the assignment sheet, so I just stood there like an idiot and DPS'd the boss. And well, it worked because we managed to get him down. Unfortunately, the ring did not drop. So that is every single wing of Naxxramas. But of course, we aren't done just yet, because we could now move on to the second last boss in the raid, Saphiron. This boss, to my knowledge, is widely considered one of the hardest bosses next to the 4 Horsemen in Kel'Thuzad. The amount of preparation that goes into fighting just this boss is insane, because every player is expected to buy or farm out gear that would give them a minimum of 200 frost resistance. And on top of that, every player before the pool is popping greater frost protection potions and shadow protection potions, but also magic resistance potions and juju chill. Mechanics wise, he is pretty cool though. First of all, he casts invisible blizzards, epic, but the main mechanic of this fight is when he flies into the air, because he will freeze up to 5 targets in an ice block that also does AoE when it is cast, and he will then cast Frost Breath, which is a one-shot mechanic, and the only way that we can avoid it is by hiding behind those ice blocks from earlier. Unfortunately, things started to go downhill when it was called for me to innervate a healer that was 1,000 miles away from me. And granted, it was my fault for running straight through a blizzard. I actually didn't think it would kill me as fast as it did, but unfortunately, the rest of the raid group wasn't far behind me. And at this point, we had already been in the raid for a couple hours, and well, the raid leader decided to call it for the night and we would try again next week. Okay, so originally I wasn't going to put this raid in the video, but here we are anyway. Fast forward to next week, we are once again inside of Naxxramas, and everything had gone very smoothly. We one-shot 4 Horsemen again, and we even got a Kiss of the Spider drop. And no, I didn't get any loot, thank you for asking. But eventually, we make it back to Saphiron and can take a shot at him once again. Now, I think it's at least worth mentioning that with this group, the SRs are slightly weird. You get 3 SRs for the first 13 bosses, but when we get to Saphiron and Kel'Thuzad, you get an extra 1. Now, I actually don't really need anything from either of these bosses, so I put my 1 SR into getting an item called the Might of the Scourge. Simply, it lets you enchant your shoulders to give plus 26 attack power and 1% crit, which is absolutely insane. And well, we are getting to the end of the fight, and we are looking pretty damn good with only 1 death. And we get him down. And guess what? The enchant dropped, which is good, don't get me wrong, but now next week, I literally don't have anything to soft reserve between Saphiron and Kel'Thuzad. And lastly is of course the final boss of Vanilla WoW, Kel'Thuzad. Again, this boss is considered to be one of the hardest vanilla bosses, and I went into it not really knowing what I was doing. Phase 1, we actually couldn't attack the boss himself, and instead waves of ads start to run towards us, and simply we just needed to DPS them down. Phase 2 begins and Kel'Thuzad is now killable, and we were separated into 3 different groups, and that's when a giant red swirly thing appeared on the ground. So obviously I stood directly in the center of it and it one-shot me. I really don't know what I was thinking at this point, or rather what I was not thinking of, but as I laid dead on the floor, I don't have a single clue what is going on. There are ads being shackled, there were people being polymorphed, and people were dying quite rapidly, and the fight was pretty tight butt cheeks at the end, but they managed to get the kill. Excellent contribution from yours truly at the end there. But you know what? It still counts. And I would like to say thank you to the guild Space Monkeys for allowing me to join them for my first time in Naxxramas. A great group of guys and some really funny dudes. So again, thank you guys for the awesome raid nights. I hope you all enjoyed today's video because I enjoyed making it. Naxxramas, what a raid. This was quite easily one of the most epic experiences I've had in WoW Classic, and I really did enjoy raiding it for my first time, and I cannot wait to do it more. As for content, I've still got the next Hunter video in the works. It's turning out better than I had hoped, to be honest. As for class leveling, I think it is pretty clear now that we will be doing Shaman next. So I will put up a raise poll pretty soon. Basically, the plan is whenever the TBC pre-patch hits, we will be doing a Draenei Paladin. The other thing is that the Hunter video is out now too, which is every video from levels 1 to 60, and I did have a couple people tell me that they weren't getting notifications or recommendations for that video for whatever reason, so just in case you wanted to watch it, now you know it is out. Anyway, I think that is enough yapping for today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later.